Thanks, Andrew, for joining me again. Last time we were talking about policy, and we were talking about how policy in an organization is sort of like a living thing. Maybe you could think about organizations as ecosystems. So where I want to get into now is, like we talked about, ecosystems, living organisms, whatever you want to call it, that's like natural world stuff. Those things change.
Yeah.
And I want to explore what happens with change. Tied to policy, but like we talked about last time, there's a context that a policy exists in. Can you talk to us about, like, fundamentally, is there like a top of mind question when we think about organizational change and policy?
Yeah, before we get into how it shows up, maybe I'll step back and talk about like 3 core backstopping phrases, principles, references we have that help us frame why one should be comfortable with change, or why change is present. So first and foremost, we think every system is currently designed to produce exactly what it's producing. And that's a result of, it was a snapshot of time and place. It was a snapshot of when the system was created. And you can look at the relationship of people or policy or the organization to how it's operating, and you can tell how old that design was, right? Just purely by Conway's law, how things interact, it's producing the organization. So there's this truth of whatever you're experiencing was right for when it was developed.
You mentioned Conway's law. Explain that in a couple sentences.
Conway's law says the interactions and the communication and the architecture, could be technology, could be people, could be policy, is designed, will be designed, and it will reflect how people actually interact. So the way you experience the organization is a reflection of the interactions in the organization, is the way to say it. So if you take this out of context for any company, I pick up the phone, I call customer support, and if they don't have this other information, I can clearly tell you behind the scenes, those 2 departments don't work together. That's Conway's law manifested. So we believe every system designed to produce exactly what it's producing for the time and place, and a healthy organization will continually update that time and place. It's not static, it's not deterministic. We know conditions change, and those conditions could be market conditions, internal people shifts, leader shifts, vision shifts, even just like how big the organization is and the number of interactions. All of those things influence.
So if you're scaling really quickly, this ends up being like a big thing. You're probably spending a lot of time talking about what has shifted and changed in the organization.
And hopefully you're continually making incremental updates to reflect that shift.
If you're healthy.
If you're healthy.
If you're maybe not healthy, you're sort of running with the same, models that you had 3 years ago, and you're probably going to experience a bunch of pain.
That's right, and you'll have a whole bunch of gaps, and they'll be very evident, and gaps will show up in that version as tension, conflict, and upset people. Okay, so we have
suppression of all of those things underneath the surface, and then it's only happens.
That's exactly right. Okay, so there's that truth, or that principle. There's a second one, that having the right answer is necessary, but it's insufficient. So we can know what a better policy looks like. We can even write the better policy. We can create the better picture. But until you enlist people and bring them along, having the right answer won't matter. So I can know exactly what to do, but unless I enlist the people around me through co-opting or alignment or leadership, there's a variety of ways we can talk about that. The right answer is insufficient, because it's about the application of the right answer and getting people comfortable with the right answer.
Especially if there's this under the surface thing going on where people are like, oh, well, that's how we said we were going to work, but we don't work that way anymore, so they're just not even going to get bought into any policy, because they play the game where it's like, oh, that policy is irrelevant, or they joke about like, that 400-page policy, did you read that today before you woke up? No.
Sure, right. Okay. Yeah, and so then this gets into our last kind of truth we believe, and we know, it's been proven, and there's whole consultancies just specialize in change. That once you have the right answer or a belief of the right answer, the hardest activity is not getting to the right answer. It's actually creating the change to support the right answer. And that change takes more cycles, effort, energy than anyone's going to predict. And the people leading the change, so here's the underlying of what we're saying, are already exhausted because they were the creator of it. They were investing in it. They were the designer of it. So they had the right answer. They put all of the cycles in to get there. And nobody else around them has any of this exposure or attention or energy or cycles with it. And so there's a discrepancy of the people leading the change already feeling exhausted, and the receiver of the change could be a new policy implementation, could be a shift in the organization, could be even just like when I get a new leader, the leaders who made that decision are already exhausted with that decision because they've been working on it for so long. But this is my first interaction with you as my leader, and I don't know what this means.
Yeah.
And we then shortcut, maybe, just even abandon the energy it takes to change, and that's where failure occurs. It's not because we didn't have the right answer again, it's because we didn't invest the appropriate energy into getting people along. So this is where you create skeptics. It's not because always they disagree with it, it's because they weren't enlisted or brought along in the journey. So when I hear people talk about stakeholders, and we'll talk about this I think in a few moments, like how do you manage your stakeholders? And that one's a skeptic, therefore we have to dismiss them or we have to do something different. They might just be a skeptic because they haven't been brought along.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand why are they getting mapped to where they are, because it's the change piece that's probably the limiter, not the actual mapping of where that person is as a skeptic.
Okay.
So take all that. We believe those things to be true, and therefore we have to design change as the vehicle for adoption.
Okay.
We have to design the outcome of whatever the right answer is in a way in which can be absorbed. Okay, so
are there different sort of levels of complexity with that? Like I know sometimes when we're talking about change, like if you have a direct report or there's a single person, you have to navigate that. That's different than if there's a smaller group of people. That's a different way. You have to think about the change differently if we're talking about like a large group of people.
Yeah, the scale of difficulty is I think what you're referencing it like the scale of size.
Yeah.
So if it's just two of us, it's one thread.
Yeah.
If there's three of us, there's this thread, and this thread. So three people have three. But you add a fourth, so it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
So with every new node you're adding, the intensity of interpretation and point-to-point interaction increases, so you have to have a better foundation of alignment.
Yep. Do you find even if there's like, let's say there's a just drop out idea of a policy in the middle of all of that space, one, and then there's almost you could treat the policy as another part of the triangle, how I relate to you and how we both relate to the policy. That's essentially another node. Do you find like does it help, hurt? Does it even matter? Maybe the answer is all of the above. When a policy is supposed to, we talked about in a previous conversation, having a policy sort of being a central construct of the thing. But now when we start talking about people, you can only go so far getting everybody like oriented against the construct of a policy. Like how does a policy fit into those spaces too?
Yeah, when I think about the node, if we just oversimplify a node, be it a policy, a person, a thing, again, the increasing volume of nodes creates complexity.
Yeah.
And so if it's just you and I and a policy, we can very quickly understand, is it you and I having an issue? Is it me individually with the policy? Is it you and I both having an issue with the policy? We can triangulate against the policy node. Is it the node or is it the relationship? When there's 10 policies and 10 people, 20 nodes, the ambiguity of is it a people? Is it a one person to a policy? Is it a collection of people all hating that one policy? Is it the concept we don't like that style of node called a policy?
Yeah.
We're adding layers of complexity into the narrative. So what I heard your question was, and tie it back to your opening question, living systems, which is what an organization is, time and place, we have an answer, wants to be deterministic and develop nodes. Here they are, they're stable, and now everybody go interact and play healthily. And what the living system tends to forget is that the node answer is insufficient. It's actually about the connection of the nodes. And we under-prioritize or deprioritize our energy into the strength of the relationship of the nodes, meaning do I have conflict with the policy? Do I have conflict with the concept of policy? Do I have conflict with the person?
Yeah.
And we forget that, and this is now the governance piece, how the nodes interact, is a policy unto its own, regardless of if the node itself is a policy. So there's policy to manage policy, and then there's policy to manage our relationship, and then there's policy for policies to manage each other, right? And so this, we now did nested.
Or processes, like
or
the policy might have something that is actually affecting a different sort of aspect of the organization.
Yeah. And when we oversimplify, and what so many organizations do, I developed a node, here's a policy, everybody gets it, right? We also now are forgetting about the human emotional component of it. It's never as clear as the person who authored it thinks it's going to be, right? And this gets into the change piece and the adoption piece.
Why you need feedback loops as you're developing policy. You get, one of the things that we talk about all the time in terms of policy creation is maybe the drag it can feel when you're creating policy and you have to go through different review cycles. Well, there's reason there to give people an opportunity with authority to sort of change things, but there's also, you're sort of prototyping the efficacy of a policy. At the end of the day, trying to get in front of what you're talking about is people are going to relate to the policy in different ways, and so you need to sort of get in front of how people might relate to this thing.
Yeah, and a tool Liminal Arc brings from our background would be fast, incremental, and iterative cycles.
Okay.
In the technology world, we call this the tension between agile development and waterfall development. So if I apply that here, do I want to spend all this time to get what I believe is one correct policy, authorship, and it takes a long cycle and I do it in a vacuum and I put it into the world? Well, I have emotional energy, it's correct, but I have no feedback loops.
Yeah.
And there's a series of frameworks we use. One, fast incremental iterative feedback cycles. Take the thinnest slice of that, get some feedback, iterate. And if you have that as a core pattern, you've already created the platform for a living organization. It's incrementally changing all the time based off a feedback loop. You're never done.
So that should be good news for people that have to create policy, and there's different gateways. Like, you're doing that not because people want to jump through hoops. If it's an effective and healthy organization, you're doing that to increase the likelihood that when it gets into the wild, people are going to be receptive and, at best advocate for it, or at worst just be comfortable with it.
That's right. And there's a lot of ways you can gain feedback. So we want to add a little bit of structure to incremental and iterative feedback. One of the ways we bring that in is we think about the stakeholders we're asking for feedback. Do you want feedback from everybody? Or do you have someone who's on this side of the gradient of like, I don't believe in any of this and why it's needed, so here's my feedback. And I actually have someone on this side that says, this is exactly what we need and I'm an advocate for. Do you get feedback from one or both? And building structure that, okay, skeptics and supporters are both valuable feedback loops, and someone who is so close to it, they might have wrote one very similar, and someone who's never done this before gaining feedback. We built this 2x2 concept of stakeholder mapping to use a mapping activity to understand where the feedback needs to live, and then back to our governance conversation and back to our prioritization conversation, out of these stakeholders, who do I actually care about? Who am I trying to influence and bring along in the change? So we map those things out for incremental and iterative feedback. And we also use, I think to what you just said, like the comfort nature of this, as if you can do a little slice of it, okay, and then you gain some feedback and someone sees their voice has been incorporated. The organizational voice has been incorporated, at least heard.
Yeah.
You build trust. And the more trust, so I'm drawing this with my hand, we have a visual that's like an infinity symbol. The more trust you can build with someone, the easier it is to bring them along and change. The easier it is, we label it as influence, to build influence. And the only way you can build influence is based off of credibility. And we believe one of the easiest ways to build credibility is with small, thin slice, incremental and iterative attempts to showcase, I was here, I'm now here, and I can bring you along. I was here, I'm now here, I can bring you along. And all of this is underneath the guise of, don't go disappear in a silo and build this thing in a vacuum in a really grand way and do this grand reveal. We use this phrase with our clients. Our clients should never be surprised.
Yep.
They've been brought along. We bring them as partners, right? We really enlist them as a partner. So when I think about as applying this to policy, anybody who's going to be put in the box of that policy, you have to play this game, should never be surprised with the first time of them reading the policy. They should have had either early iterations, this is directionally where we're going, or they had some like, this is also why we're changing. We miss that component a lot in this development cycle of, here's a new rule book, but I never told you why we're changing the rule book. And I never enlisted you in helping me grow the narrative of why. That's a tactic as well. Again, going back, the right answer of the new policy is insufficient. The way we think about changing to the new policy, the tools we use to enlist people, that then slicing to incremental feedback loops, to build trust, all of these are the patterns underneath of policy creation or policy change. And I like.
So if I tie it back to like a fundamental question,
Yep.
when there's some sort of issue that comes up and policy gets thrown into the arena of conflict around it, maybe it's just one person, maybe it's smaller group of people, maybe it's a whole organization is starting to bubble up with issues around policy. The fundamental question is going to be, do we need to change the policy, or is it not actually a policy issue? So when we talk about the trust influence loop, we talk about stakeholder maps. At some point you sort of have to make the decision, and it's not necessarily just either or.
Yep.
But like, at what point and what are the types of things that you do, as a leader, as someone closely tied to the policy, to say, you know what, I'm going to do maybe these 3 things before I go down the path of, I need to change a policy. Because when I hear you talk about policies and their role within the organization, and there's a potential change coming forward, like at some point, quality policies shouldn't change that much, but people should really be investing in the sort of relationships around the policy. So like, what would maybe be 3 good tips to, like, what you should do these 3 things before you go down the path of, we need to change the policy?
Yeah, I'm going to tie it back to our prior conversation. I think a lot of it anchors on that. So I hear attention. An individual has a problem with a policy. A group of people have an issue with a policy. A policy is in conflict with another policy. Like, that's a very evident one. That
or like the policy is clearly the impediment of some sort of like process being effective. Okay.
So my first question when I root cause, so I'm going to start with a quick like root cause analysis. Am I having a structures problem? Like, is this just because 2 different things were given autonomy? And they're in conflict with creation, so we're creating duplication of responsibility or agency or energy. Okay. So I'm going to start there. And if I say, it's just actually we don't know where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
Cool, let's start with the boundary piece. Let's figure out who owns it, and then let's figure out in that new boundary of application, is there still conflict?
Yeah.
Cool. If we realize we have created duplication, easy to solve. If we say, no, there's no duplication, we actually haven't changed and have any structures issue, we have a relational issue. Okay, so I think that's level 2. Level 2 relational issue says, is it because someone feels unsafe? Is it because they don't feel heard? Like, I'm trying to like thin slice some categories. It's unsafe, they don't feel heard, or it is creating a negative result. If the policy is actually producing bad outcomes, I'm still going to tie it back to my structures conversation.
Something that you could actually directly observe. This is a negative, not necessarily emotional result, but like something
logical.
Okay, logical.
Okay. Logical or objective. But the only way I know how to measure that is I go back to the structure, the value piece of it. The value structure says, this thing is preventing this green light from remaining green. And now I've taken Matthew or Andrew's opinion out of it, and I say, look, here's why this version of the policy is struggling. And that's actually what the person's struggling to say, most likely, is
Especially if they're bringing a lot of emotion to the table.
100%.
The emotion could just be an indicator of their sort of sense that, hey, this policy, while it might not be in conflict with someone else, it is some impediment to the organization.
That's right.
Somewhere. Okay.
And so the headline there is, every policy and every structure needs to have measures.
Yep.
Can I measure what it's producing and its impact? Is it going up where I want it or down?
This goes back into why measuring things are so important when we talk about navigating policy change. A good indicator to the fact you need to actually change the policy is, do the measures tell you that something's wrong and you can change the policy?
And from all of our history with all of our clients, the first thing that gets abandoned is measures.
Yep.
Like, it gets put under the table because it's hard. People don't know how to actually measure things, especially like impact of a policy on a thing. The traceability of measurement is not easy. So we just tend to not do it and hope for the best.
Yep.
Okay, so create measures against the structure though. That's the second thing. I think the last thing, so if we realize it's not duplication and we have measures and someone is still having tension, or a group of people have attention, I go instantly to my stakeholder map.
Yeah.
Where do I put them? And is it that they don't have trust with the person that created it, or trust with the organization, or trust with the policy itself? So like, we figure out, do they not have trust? And is it because they're skeptic or not brought along?
Yeah.
And I then go through that mapping activity of, is the noise, and because I really think about all this, it's just kind of noise. There's probably some happy, healthy truth underneath all this, but is this noise that is emerging because we haven't enlisted them? And if all of this, no duplication, we have good measures, we've enlisted them, now I can finally get to the person issue. Like, maybe I might actually now have evidence that the wrong person's in the wrong seat attempting the wrong thing. And it could now just be skills, capability, or vision, mission, values, alignment issues. But so many people start with that. You don't get it. Or, I did it right, how come you don't see it? And we skip all of this root causing to get there. So I think the 3 things that I identified get rolled up into the statement. There's a objective logical chain of progression for root cause analysis that starts with every bit of noise can be patterned into that, if we air quote it, framework. Start with duplication reduction. or make sure that there's not. Start with measures, start with where does a person get enlisted? And all of this is true, and it still has tension. Now we have a conversation we can actually index to.